this fake identity. It's not fake, but that's not my identity anymore in this civilian atmosphere. Because when I wear my uniform, I get special accolades. I get special attention. People thank me for my service. When I take off my uniform and I just have civilian
You
clothes,
ought to
I'm
be
just the
in
soda jerk down
pictures.
at the drugstore.
You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit.
Hello,
You
everybody,
ought to
and
be
welcome
in
to the show. My name is
pictures.
James, joined as ever by my good friend Steve, and this is one of our Every Best Picture episodes where we are going through year by year and looking at every single film that has won the Oscar for Best Picture. This episode, we are talking 1946's The Best Years of Our Lives.
You know, James, this film was delightful. I'd never seen this movie before. And, we've talked in years past how sometimes the winner of the Academy Awards somehow doesn't carry the cultural zeitgeist, maybe some of the runners up of the films that didn't win. And I know we're going to address this a little bit later, but
Mm.
It's a Wonderful Life also came out in 1946 and was one of the contenders for this film. And it's too bad that over the years, I've seen It's a Wonderful Life more times than I can think of. I had never seen The Best Years of Our Lives. And yet, when I read a little history on the film, it completely dominated the cultural zeitgeist, I think, of both America and the UK in a
Yeah.
post-World War II environment.
Yeah, no, the same. I had never watched it. I knew basically what it was about. It was about soldiers returning from the war and trying to reintegrate. And I just thought, oh, okay, I could kind of
Yeah.
guess what that's going to be. It's going to be a little bit stodgy. And I knew the one famous bit of trivia that one of the leads was a real
Yeah.
double amputee who had no
Mhm.
hands, and he played a character who comes back with no hands, and that he won an Oscar for it. That was basically all I knew, and so I sat down to watch this for the first time just yesterday, actually,
Mhm.
and I thought, okay, here we go. This is going to be a bit of a slog, but especially at 3 hours long. But I was like, and within moments, I was completely swept away and transfixed by it, and I absolutely loved it. I was so taken in by these three very different characters playing three very different kinds of returning veterans, and I was wholly invested in the love stories. There were
Yes.
like three love
Yeah.
stories, and I was all in. Particularly Fred. Is it Dana Andrews' character?
Yes.
I was rooting for him so hard,
Yeah.
because you're not quite sure which way it's going to go because he's married, but his wife is, not that interested, and she wants a good life and she wants to party hard and all the rest of it. And he immediately falls in love with his serviceman friend's senior officer's daughter, and you're like, oh well, this is bad news. This is
Yeah,
going
this,
to
this
end.
is this is a catastrophe
Yeah,
waiting to
this
happen
is.
here.
So I was never quite sure where that relationship was going to go.
Mhm.
Whether it was going to, split him and his friend apart, or whether it was going to split her family apart, or what was going to happen. So, I was really rooting for that one. And then obviously the great story about Homer, who
Yeah.
returns with no hands, and how's that going to work? He seemed on the surface at first that he was okay with it, and that his family seemed okay with it, but then obviously, it's there's a whole journey that they all
Yeah.
go on, and yeah, it was perfect Sunday afternoon matinee viewing, and I thought it was brilliant, and I will watch it again for sure.
I found the film absolutely delightful. And what I thought interesting was Fredric March won the Best Actor award for it, and Harold Russell won Best Supporting Actor. And yet, for me, it was Dana Andrews who was the compelling character of that triumvirate.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. As I said, he was the character that I sort of was rooting for most of all.
Yeah.
He was the one that I sort of got got most invested in. And no, he wasn't even nominated, which was sort of surprising. Yeah, because Frederick March's character is kind of like the least showy of them,
Yeah.
and in a
Yeah.
way has sort of the least interesting sort of dramatic arc. He seems to slip pretty quickly back into family life, gets a job at the bank, and his whole sort of mission, if you like, his struggle is with giving loans to returning
Yeah.
veterans. And you're kind of like, yeah, it's not quite as sort of emotionally engaging as
Yeah.
the other two.
Although his drunken speech kind of probably what swayed Academy voters because that was a great drunken speech.
Yes, that was very good. Yeah, he did drunk pretty well. He spends most of the movie kind of in various
Drunk.
states of inebriation. But yeah, but
I
that when
love
he
I love
gets
how
up.
the wife is keeping score of how many drinks he's having at the dinner. She's just marking them off on it with her fork. Remember, she's making the every
Oh
time he has
yeah.
another drink, she notches it off. My wife got a big, we were watching it together. She got a big kick out of that.
I liked how sort of accepting they were as well. Like when he first gets back, he's like, right, we're gonna hit the town, wife and daughter, off we go. And they seemed quite game for it in a way that I don't think you know, wives and daughters may have been. And that quite impressed me. What's her name?
Yeah.
Myrna Loy, who gets top billing actually, doesn't she? She was
Yeah, and my wife commented how much she enjoyed Myrna Loy in this film.
yeah, yeah, because she had played sort of femme fatales and sort of comic characters before, hadn't she? She's in The Thin
Yeah.
Man,
Yeah.
that series of
Yeah.
movies, and so this was kind of a little bit more sort of domesticated for her. But she was great. I mean, the cast in general is pretty
Yeah.
stacked,
Yeah.
actually. I kind of
Yeah.
recognized almost everybody in it.
I'm used to a lot of the Vietnam era films like Rambo or Coming Home, these films that dealt with the return of veterans from a war that was not widely looked on favorably.
Mm,
And yet in this film, you get to see from the perspective of this wonderful, basically all of America and UK and the West are support of these veterans coming back. And you're seeing they want to help all of these our boys who had done all this to save democracy. And yet even in the midst of that environment, the difficulty they have reintegrating back into civilian society. Like when Dana Andrews, the wife, wants him to wear his uniform out, and he's
yeah,
torn between, well, that was my identity, but that's not my identity anymore. And how long do I maintain this fake identity? It's not fake, but that's not my identity anymore in this civilian atmosphere. Because when I wear my uniform, I get special accolades. I get special attention. People thank me for my service. When I take off my uniform and I just have civilian clothes, I'm just the soda jerk down at the drugstore. And how
yeah.
quickly we go from these positions of immense responsibility, a bombardier fighting for democracy, fighting the enemy, towards this very mundane living that you could see how it's affecting Fredric March's character, even going from having to be an officer and being a leader in a completely different environment, and then suddenly you're just kind of making short-term loans for people,
Mm,
and just that. I thought the film did a wonderful job of capturing these gentlemen's frustrations of trying to navigate back into a world that is far less interesting, far more mundane, and far less accommodating to the stories. It makes me think a lot of times, although it's not at the same level, of expats when we go home and we have all these tall tales of life in the exotic Orient and
right.
we've got all these experiences, and then you go home and people just aren't interested in those stories. They don't
They
care.
can't connect, they can't relate,
That's it.
they don't know what to ask you about. It's as simple
Right.
as that, really. But yeah, no, I really appreciated how the film does that. You're absolutely right. I was watching it thinking this is obviously the first movie of its kind really to come out. I
Yeah.
couldn't really think of any movies that dealt with the First World War in this way. And
No.
obviously Vietnam was the big one. There are so many movies like this. Like, yeah, you said Coming Home and Rambo. Also, obviously, Born on the Fourth of July, The Deer Hunter.
Well, yeah.
Movies
Yeah.
like that.
Oh,
It
yeah.
was really popular. Even like random movies like Jackknife with Robert De Niro. It was all
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
sort of veterans coming back and reintegrating. And I hadn't seen that. Or I think audiences at the time hadn't seen that. And I felt they did a great job of covering so many different elements of that. The three different soldiers between them. They sort of managed to cover so many of those bases. I mean, the Dana Andrews character, there's a moment towards the end where he basically sort of packs it all in.
Hmm.
His wife, is cheating on him and says that she wants a divorce, which is music to his ears because it's kind of like
Yes.
what
Yeah.
he's always wanted. But already, Fredric March has told him to steer clear of his daughter, and so he's like, "That's it. I'm off. I'm just going to go and hit the road. I don't have any skills. All of these skills that I honed. I was the best bombardier. I was great. I could hit the
Yeah.
target every time. Back in the world." I can do nothing. So I'm going to hit the road. And for a moment, I was like, this is genius, because Dana Andrews was always one of those great sort of film noir character
Yeah.
actors
Yeah.
as well. And I was like, so many of the protagonists in those kind of film noir movies were exactly this kind of guy. They were
Yeah.
like the returning veteran from the war who were now completely lost and marginalized by a society that didn't know what to do with them,
Yeah.
and they couldn't get, so they ended up just sort of hitting the road and going from small town to small town, and inevitably they get into scrapes with the wrong woman and end up murdering her
Yeah.
husband and then going to jail. I was like, this is, Postman Always Rings Twice, or Out of the Past. It was so, I've seen this character, and but then he doesn't, and at the last minute he is saved. He's
Yeah.
wandering around by the disused plains, which was a real place, in Ontario in California, I think I read it was.
Yes. Yeah.
And then he's thrown a bone and he's given a shot,
Yeah.
and then I was welling up, when he's at the
Yeah.
wedding at the end. And in fact, if I'm completely honest, I was welling up at so many points during this movie.
Interesting. Yeah.
Again and again. I mean, I'm a real softie for sort of sentimental. It's the cheesy, sentimental, um, optimistic moments rather
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
sad things that
Mhm.
make me teary-eyed in movies. And even really early on, like when they're first coming back and then they're first getting opportunities to again and again and again, I was like, wow, this is really hitting hard and hitting early.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it managed to sustain that all the way through. And I was I just kept responding to it, but just was really impressed at how many different perspectives and facets of the experience, the kind of
Yeah.
coming home experience, this managed to cover and address in 3 short hours, I have to say, at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, you have three very distinct relationships, and particularly, the someone who he didn't necessarily get a Dear John letter, but Dana Andrews' character had the whirlwind romance, and then finds out that his wife has basically enjoyed having his pay come home every
Mm,
month, but wasn't really that interested in him. And you realize he says at one point, and we can kind of forget, 75 years out, the pay difference, but he was making $400 a month in the military, but as a soda jerk, he's making $32 a week. And
yeah.
it doesn't take a mathematician to think that guy's just lost about 70% of his income. And the lifestyle change, when you lose 70% of your income, you go from being a very respected member of the military to the guy who's, giving you your ice cream sundaes and making peanuts. And having to deal with that relationship with his wife. I can't remember the last time I was in a movie where I rooted for the breakup of a marriage more than this one.
Well, that moment when Peggy, Teresa Wright's character, the daughter, she's like, says to her parents, I love the relationship she has with her parents. It's all so open. And she's like,
Yes,
I'm gonna break up that
their,
marriage.
their
And they're
marriage.
like, oh, okay, really? Okay.
Yeah.
You home
And
wrecker, you.
well, why do you want to do that? Because he says he doesn't love her. Because she says, and then they're looking at each other after like 30 plus years of marriage. How
Mm,
many times have we thought that, honey? Every marriage goes through that. And you could
mhm,
see the look on Teresa Wright's face when she had this great euphoric idea of how she's going to break up this marriage because they don't love one another. And then she's realized she has become the cliche. She's become the stereotype. Her parents have just exposed her plan. You think this is original and you think you're the only one? Honey, the reason we're warning you against this, we know how this ends. Of course, actually, in the end, Teresa Wright turns out to be correct. Teresa
yeah,
Wright is right, but
Teresa Wright. Yeah.
was
Oh,
right.
well, that's it. As soon as she said, I'm going to break up that marriage. And like you said, as soon as she said that, I was like, yeah, you go,
Yeah,
girl, you break
yeah,
up that marriage. It was it was interesting. And I liked how they didn't kind of shy away from those aspects of it. There were
yeah.
sometimes movies, from this studio period when the Hays Code is enforced and all the rest of it, they'll shy away from those more immoral or morally gray areas, but this one really didn't.
No, I got to admit, I was wondering whether they were going to allow him to run away with Teresa Wright and have that relationship. I thought they might, because of the era this was filmed in and a
Mm,
desire to probably keep marriages together after the war, that they would have done that. But I think what this film did was, when Fredric March and his wife and Myrna Loy explain about their marriage going through difficulties, we can quickly make the calculation in our head, yes, but that was a solid marriage to begin with. The
Mm.
foundations of that marriage were good from the start. And yes, they have the natural storms, but they have the foundation. No one for a second would look at Dana Andrews married to the nightclub waitress singer and think, well, that was a marriage on a good, solid foundation.
So you're not
That's
rooting for those guys at all.
no, no, no. This is
Right, and then obviously we've got to talk about Harold Russell, yeah, who
yes.
plays Homer. Who is the double amputee. You can't be
Yeah.
the sailor who loses his hands and comes back. And Harold Russell was a non-actor that they found. Apparently,
Right.
they changed the script. It was originally going to be someone coming back with PTSD, which I guess they kind of gave to Dana Andrews'
In
character
Andrews, yeah.
to
Yeah.
a degree. But they're like, no, 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 we want to do something a little bit more than that. And so the director William Wyler went out and found Harold Russell,
Yeah.
a non-actor who had lost his hands in military service training, of all things.
I know
You know,
how tragic is that? It's one thing to lose your hands because you did some daring heroic thing that saved 50 guys. But no,
right?
no, it was in a training accident. It's just horrifically tragic.
It was, but it was a genius stroke of genius, really. I mean, he's great. He's not the greatest actor in the world, but
You know,
I think he pulls off his
he
character because they're supposed to be sort of everyman kind of characters anyway.
and he had that quality. Like he was the good old boy who played high school quarterback football and was the, star in the small town
Mm.
and loses his hands, comes back. I mean, he did play that all-around American Midwestern boy to a T.
I think what I liked about his character is that he was already, I mean, perhaps not psychologically, but at least physically, he was over it. He had mastered the craft of using his kind of
Yeah.
hook hands. He could do everything with it. And there are obviously a number of moments when other characters are like, "Oh, let me do that for you," or "Let me help you with that," and he's
Yeah.
like, "No, no, I've got it, I've got it," and he has. By and large, he drops one glass at one point, but that's
Yeah.
more because he's upset than anything else. But he can do it. He can even use an air rifle and all sorts like that.
That made
Uh,
me a little nervous, I have to admit. Him
yeah,
with that gun was a little bit
sure.
scary at times.
Yeah, you're like, okay, is he going to snap and go on like a shooting spree or something, or kill himself or something like that? But that's why I love that scene at the end with Wilma when he's basically sort of rejected her and sort of said, you don't want this, you don't want to be basically my carer for the rest of your days. And she's like,
Yeah.
no, 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 I do, I've chosen this. And he's like, okay, well, come upstairs and let me show you.
Yeah.
Let me
Yeah.
show you what you will need to do, because this.
Yeah.
And then when he takes off his arms, I love that line when he sort of says, "This is when I'm at my most helpless. This is when I'm
Yeah.
scared." It's like when my hands are on the table there, and I
And
can't light a cigarette, I can't have a drink of water, I can't open the door on my own
yeah.
because I can't put them back on by
Yeah.
myself. I can take them off, but I can't put them back on. And she's just, and that moment, and she's just like,
Yeah.
no, it's all good,
Yeah.
I know what
I'm
I'm getting
good.
into. It's great. It's
Yeah.
great stuff.
No, you're right. You see that look suddenly that his look opens up and he realizes, oh gosh, I had nothing to be afraid of. Like she really will stand with me.
Hmm.
And in that moment, like you said, I wouldn't say I quite welled up, but it was a very emotional moment. And this film is full of those emotional moments. It really hit the right beats from beginning to end. It knew how to play everybody in the best possible terms throughout the film.
Yeah, I mean, if I have one slight reservation with it, and maybe it's just me, I'm too jaded, is that I'm surprised that all three guys have a happy ending.
Yeah,
I was kind of like, oh, which one of them is gonna kill himself or whatever? Which one of them is not gonna get through it all?
yeah,
But they all do.
yeah,
Sorry, spoilers for for a what 80-year-old movie. But they all come through great. They go through some tough times, some low points, whatever. But they all emerge victorious. And I guess
yeah,
they needed the positivity at that time.
yeah, yeah,
But I thought, okay, because there are three of them, I think
yeah,
that gives you enough
yeah,
emotional latitude to have
yeah,
one of them fail, and then the other makes the other two stronger or whatever. But they didn't go that way, and I was surprised. I guess because I've seen films like The Deer Hunter, where
yeah,
none of them get out of it really in one piece. I was kind of a little bit too
That's
jaded. And
that's the 70s filmmaking versus the 40s filmmaking for sure
yes,
there.
yes, I think it's a reflection of
Mm.
of the time, and I think they realized after what sort of so many years of war, that's not what the people wanted and what they
Yeah,
needed.
yeah. I want to also highlight before we move on to how it did at the Academy Awards, how that idea of they introduced the counter narrative to the war with the guy who comes into
Yeah,
the drugstore and basically telling Homer, you didn't have to lose your hands. We shouldn't have been in that war to begin with. What are you saying? We couldn't fight for democracy? Blah 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 blah. Oh, hey, the Japanese and the Germans had nothing against Americans. That was a European thing. Why are we busy? And it's interesting. We have echoes of that today with Ukraine, with Israel, and God. Like, why is America involved here?
yeah.
And so, 50, 60, 70 years, this is a ongoing argument that is continually being played out. And I just thought it was interesting that in the middle of this film, they brought that counter narrative to basically what was a post World War II euphoria that we'd won.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I just rewatched Oppenheimer the other day, and obviously it's in there as well. When there's this whole underlying narrative of yes, we're working with the Russians, but they're not our friends.
Right.
And there was such a degree of secrecy there because it was and again, Oppenheimer and other characters keep having to ask the question, well, hang on, who are the enemies here? Who are we fighting? I thought
Uh,
we were allied with and we're supposed to be sharing information with the
yeah.
Russians in order to help. And they're like, oh no, 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 no. Yes, this short-term enemy might be the Germans, but our long-term enemy is always going to
It
be
was
the
going to be
Soviet Union.
yeah.
And so I think it's kind of like another side of that same narrative where he's coming out of it and kind of going, well, you were fighting kind of the wrong people. This is who
Yeah.
we're really fighting, as well as yes, this sort of foreign policy idea of why are we getting involved at all. But yeah, no, I was appreciative that they brought it in as well because I think it was a dialogue that was going on throughout the war, as
Yeah.
well at home,
Yeah.
and it was something that I think a number of veterans you see it a lot. Again, go back to Vietnam, you see it a lot in Born on the 4th of July. I think is probably the
Right.
best movie about that, where they come home and obviously they've had a terrible time and they're struggling to reintegrate, but then they're being faced on a daily basis with people who say you suck. What you did was
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah.
You didn't fight for your country. You shouldn't be lauded as any kind of hero for what you did. What
Yeah.
you did is disgraceful. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
hang on a minute.
Right. I'm just doing my
Yeah.
job. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
What? Yeah.
Well,
So
they weren't even doing their job. In that case, they were drafted in, weren't they? So,
that's true. That's true. James, moving on to
hmm,
how did the best years of our lives fare at the 1946 Academy Awards?
it did very, very well.
Yeah.
Actually, it got 7 Oscars. It won Best Picture, Best Director, as we mentioned, Best Actor for Fredric March, Best Editing, Adapted Screenplay, Original Score, and then the real interesting story is obviously with Harold Russell. He was
Yes.
nominated for Best Supporting Actor, but as he was a non-actor, there was a feeling in the Academy that he wouldn't win because he's a non-actor, and as we mentioned, his performance is great and monumental and symbolic and all the rest of it, but perhaps you could argue it wasn't like the best performance. And he was up against Claude Rains in Notorious, in particular, William Damarest in The Jolsters. He had good, strong competition, and so they thought, okay, what we'll do is he probably won't win. He's an outside shot, so we want to honor him. So we're going to give him an honorary Oscar. So they gave him an honorary Academy Award for quote bringing hope and courage to his fellow veterans. Literally sending the
Hmm.
message. It's like you can be all you can be still.
Yes.
Just because you come back, you're not damaged. You have a place. And then he went and won anyway.
Hmm.
So he ended up with 2 Oscars for playing for the
The
same
same
role.
role.
And
Yeah.
and to this day, it's the only time that has ever happened that an actor has won 2 Oscars for the same role in the same film at the same time.
Yeah.
Because obviously, how could that possibly happen? It can't.
Mm.
Except it did. And so that was the big sort of takeaway. But like you mentioned at the top, Best Years of Our Lives was, I mean, it was a huge runaway critical and commercial hit. I think only Gone with the Wind had made more money to
Hmm.
date, and even by adjusted dollars, I think it's still one of the 100 biggest hits of all time. But it was up against some stiff competition that year. You've
Yeah.
mentioned It's a Wonderful Life. Also, Olivier's Henry V.
Yes.
which is an absolute banger. It's great. We're going to be talking about Olivier pretty soon because
Yeah.
he did win a couple of years later for Hamlet.
Hamlet. Yeah.
But
Oh.
arguably, you might say Henry V is the better film. And again, it's thinly veiled war propaganda as well. So it's kind
Well,
of like a really interesting, albeit from the British
yeah.
point of view, but it's definitely about as much about World War II as it is about Agincourt. And then The Razor's Edge and The Yearling, which I don't think I've seen those two.
I think I've seen The Yearling when I was younger. I've never seen Razor's Edge.
It had some competition. Yeah, Fredric March, that we say was kind of like the underplayed performance of that movie.
Yeah.
He beat out Laurence Olivier's Henry V, which is, one of the
It's
great
yeah.
Shakespearean
Oratory yeah.
performances, and as well as Gregory Peck and Jimmy Stewart, for movies. That's a really stacked cast, stacked
Yeah.
category actually.
And if I was going to give it to somebody, as I mentioned, I would have given it to Dana Andrews, who I thought, did he remind you of Stephen Boyd at all? I just thought him and Stephen Boyd just both have these chiseled, very mature, iconic. Every time I was looking at him, Stephen
I'm not
Boyd.
sure Stephen Boyd is coming to my mind.
He played opposite Charlton Heston and Ben-Hur as the Great Chariot Race. He was in
Oh yeah.
Fantastic Voyage. He led Fantastic Voyage with Raquel Welch. Great
Okay.
actor of the 50s and 60s. I think he died young, tragically. I forget, but I always liked Stephen Boyd, and it just reminded me a lot of Dana Andrews. Reminded me a lot of Stephen Boyd.
Oh, okay. I think I've seen Dana Andrews in enough other things like Laura and other sort of film noirs,
Okay.
which was why when I saw his character going down that path, I was like, oh,
Uh,
it's like an origin story for every
yeah,
film
yeah,
noir character. So I was kind of like just seeing him do his thing, really.
yeah.
But then so many of the characters I did recognize, so many of the actors I did recognize. I mean, Teresa Wright, obviously, we watched her very recently in Mrs. Miniver.
Yes,
She was
yes,
she was in that.
yeah,
And
yeah.
Pride of the Yankees, which I know is a favorite of yours. Shadow of a Doubt, Hitchcock's Shadow of a Doubt, which is one of his
Okay, I
best.
haven't seen that.
It's one of the ones that it gets obscured by all the big top tier Jimmy Stewart ones. But Shadow of
Right.
Doubt is absolutely brilliant. That's a really good one, and she's the kind of the daughter, the suspicious daughter, I think, in that one.
Okay. Check it
That's a
out.
great one to check out.
Check it out. So, James, as we draw this to a close, we need to ask that perennial question. Does The Best Years of Our Lives stand the test of time? Does it deserve its place in Oscar history? I mean, I say that as if we're left in any doubt after we've just been praising this film for 20 minutes. Absolutely, it does.
Without a doubt, it absolutely stands the test of time. I mean, it discusses so many things in such a sort of carefully considered manner. It's
Mhm.
acted brilliantly. It's pitched brilliantly. As I said, we both watched it for the first time
Yeah.
just this month, and it really sucked me in and really affected me emotionally, and I really had an absolute joy of a time watching it. And it's most interesting because on paper, does it deserve its place in Oscar history? You'd probably say no. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
you'd say what? It's up against It's a Wonderful Life and Henry V. Those are much better films. You'd think, or those are films that are talked about a lot more, probably watched a lot more.
Have
But
impacted culture into our time. This seemed to have really had a great resonance with a particular group right after the post-war era,
yeah,
but then kind of faded from collective memory. Whereas the complete opposite, whereas It's a Wonderful Life didn't really start out of the gate very quick, and
true.
yet, it had the legs, and today is considered a modern classic.
Yeah, I think it was very much a film for its time, for the moment, addressing, the issues on everybody's lips and in front of everybody. And I think in that way it kind of pioneered a particular kind of story that, as we've mentioned, has since been told again and again and again and again and again. I mean, even incredibly recently, think of recent Oscar winners like The Hurt Locker, you know,
Yes.
that's the same story. He
Yeah.
does the most dangerous job in the world. He comes home, cannot reintegrate, and goes back. It ends with him
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
back to the war, just because he cannot reintegrate. So the shadow actually is surprisingly long, and looms large over all of these stories.
But I would
And
and I would even add about the Hurt Locker, because that's a great, consider or a great example. But the Hurt Locker, as much as everyone will admit what a great film it was, Catherine Bigelow's, as I think was the first female director to win Academy Award for that film. Does that film really still have the legs today? Like, are people still talking about the Hurt Locker? It'll always be well regarded, but I doubt it's going to have much cultural memory in the next 20, 30 years.
No, I think it kind of came in a slew of sort of movies about the Iraq War and Afghanistan and whatever, sort of these post 9/11 movies.
Black Hawk Down and things like
Sure,
that.
yeah. There's so many of them, and and some of them are actually really good and have a real sort of strong political message and all the rest of it. But there were just a whole, and it is just a good example of one of those, like Black Hawk Down or Zero Dark 30 or one of those. Which is also Catherine Bigelow. But no, I mean, I think the reason that this one stands up is just because it was so original at the time.
Yeah.
And I'm amazed that it plays so well, considering the long impact that it's had and how influential it's clearly been on all of these movies, but how that didn't detract from it in any way. It remains as strong and as entertaining and as powerful as it did back then.
I'm going to leave it with that. That's what James and I thought about 1946 as the best years of our lives. But what do you think? Does it really hold the test of time? Does it deserve its place in Oscar history? We think it does. You may have a different thought. James?
That's it. Which are your favorite movies that deal with sort of returning veterans and trying to reintegrate back into society? Let us know. We've named a few, but any other big ones out there that are worth considering.
Until next episode.
Bye-bye.
To be in pictures, oh, what a hit you would be.